Russian troops have blasted their way forward and crossed a symbolic border into Ukraine's Dnipro Oblast, but the price they're paying is huge, as Ukraine and Britain have this week claimed that Russia has lost 1 million casualties in the conflict. Ukraine continues to hit high-value Russian targets hundreds of miles behind the front lines. Kharkiv again. My name is Jerome Starkey. I'm the defence editor at The Sun newspaper, and this is Frontline, your weekly roundup of the most important news from the war in Ukraine. We're starting with what's happening on the battlefield inside Ukraine, and we haven't done that for a while, but it is worth taking note because the fighting there continues to be incredibly bloody and intense. A horrific World War I style, trench warfare, urban warfare, both sides slogging it out, but Russia paying this enormous price in the lives and limbs of its young men and women. The significant advances appear to be around the town of Novopavlivka, which is northwest of Kharkiv. We've talked about Kharkiv a lot because that has been a focus of Russia's fury. To the northwest, they appear to have crossed the border from Donetsk Oblast into Dnipropetrovsk Oblast. Now that is the oblast which includes as its capital regional city Dnipro on the river of the same name. This is largely symbolic more than a strategic advance, but symbolic because sort of up to this point the fighting in Ukraine, however horrific and bloody, had been confined to a number of other provinces. Most of it has been in the Donbass, in Donetsk and Luhansk, but of course since day one of the war there was fighting in Kharkiv and further round to Sumy, Chernihiv and Kyiv, to the south in Zaporizhia and Kherson. What happened after Ukraine's sort of counter-offensive and Russia's retreat in those early days of the conflict, or the sort of first few months of the conflict, the Russians left Kyiv province. They left Chernihiv. They were forced to retreat from Sumy as well. What we've seen now, though, is that after Ukraine's lightning advance into Russia's Kursk in August, that was last August, the Russians have now counterattacked. The Ukrainians are out of Kursk and the Russians have crossed into Sumy. The Russians have reinvaded Kharkiv some months ago and they continue to be fighting there. Now, in this offensive, they're yet to capture all of Donetsk, or Luhansk, or Zaporizhia, or Kherson. But as they try and continue that sort of secondary objective of taking those four provinces, they do appear to have crossed into Dnipro. So worth noting, there's been a lot of discussion this week, or rather some discussion I've picked up on, about the rate of Russian advance. The Wall Street Journal reporting that Russia had captured more ground in the May just gone than they had for many months or years, suggesting the rate of advance had rapidly accelerated. The Institute for the Study of War appears to be sort of challenging that slightly, suggesting that Russia is moving forward now at about 12 square kilometres a day. That was, they estimated that actually they were up to at about 22 square kilometres a day in November. Nonetheless, President Zelensky has been on record this week saying that the situation on the front is very difficult, and normally when he does make comments like that, that is indicative that Ukraine is losing ground. We'll talk about the price that Russia's paying. Ukraine and the United Kingdom have both put out these statistics suggesting that Russia has lost 1 million casualties over the 3.5 years or so of this conflict. Now that's a combination of dead and wounded, but the breakdown is roughly this: 250,000 dead, 250,000 irrevocably wounded, up to another 250,000 irrevocably wounded. So those are fighters who will never return to the front lines, and another 500,000 who have been wounded but are perhaps expected to recover and may return to the fighting force. That is huge. That is by far the largest toll that Russia has paid in lives and limbs since the Second World War. And how does it compare to Ukrainian losses? Well, President Zelensky was asked about this. His figures, he suggests that Ukraine has lost 45,000 soldiers killed in action and suffered 390,000 soldiers who've been wounded. But he said that figure of 390,000 included people who have been wounded perhaps many times, so not necessarily 390,000 individuals. What does this mean? Well, the British analysis in this instance appears to chime with the Russian analysis, and that is that Moscow, the Kremlin, the Russian people appear to be willing to continue to pay this price. Britain's defence intelligence particularly put this on the Russian leadership, saying the Russian leadership, so we're talking about Putin, is prepared to pay this price so long as there is no backlash within the Russian elite, and so long as he can continue to find the sort of cannon fodder replacements to backfill those combat losses. The other thing I wanted to note on this is that Vladimir Medinsky, who is an aide to Vladimir Putin and indeed is a negotiator now, was also a negotiator at those very first Turkey talks in 2022. He gave an interview to the Wall Street Journal where he sort of said his message was Russia wins long wars. He was making that same point, that these eye-watering losses are a price that Russia is willing to pay. And Russia prides itself in a strange way of having paid a huge price during World War II to defeat Nazi Germany, and it did pay a huge price in terms of losses, suffered far more casualties than the other Allied powers at that time. What else has been happening? Well, of course, there have been Ukraine's deep strikes. They continue, and we can contrast the Ukrainian strategy in the conflict at the moment with the Russian one. The Russian one is sort of scorched earth, blast their way forward. The Ukrainian strategy is precision strikes, carefully planned operations against high-value targets to try and degrade Russia's ability to prosecute that scorched earth policy. So we've seen two significant ones this week. On the 11th of June, a gunpowder plant in Tambov hit. Spectacular footage of those explosions. The following night, the Rezonit plant in Zubovo, which is in the sort of northwestern suburbs of Moscow. That was a factory that made navigation equipment for artillery, was also hit. This, of course, comes on the back of Operation Spiderweb, Ukraine's spectacular strikes deep inside Russian territory, where they hit, they claimed, a third of Russia's strategic bombing fleet. Interesting today, because the big news today, of course, is about what Israel has been doing in Iran, striking Iran's nuclear weapons infrastructure, Israel says, and targeting military commanders and scientists involved in that. There are reports emerging that Israel has managed to do this. One of the ways they've managed to do this is by pre-positioning drones inside Iran. So suggestions that they're echoing these Ukrainian tactics that we saw in Spider's Web. But at the same time, people also pointing out, I think quite rightly, that if this does turn out to be true, in fact, this would have happened, the Israeli plan and plot to put those drones inside Iranian territory would have predated Operation Spider's Web being just a week ago. Russia also continues to hammer Ukraine's cities with its airstrikes, notably in Kharkiv this week, where at least 2 people were killed and dozens more injured in a particularly bad night of attacks. Unusual, extraordinary, and I suppose heartwarming footage emerged of one of those rescue attempts where we saw the body cam footage of one of the rescuers picking up the sound of a man buried in rubble who was singing so that they could find him. In fact, he was singing the Ukrainian national anthem. Only other things this week worth mentioning: there's been more prisoner of war swaps. These were swaps of the severely wounded prisoners of war, and indeed there has been a body swap. The body swap's slightly controversial because that's sort of slightly forcing both sides to acknowledge losses, which neither side likes to do in front of its own public because it damages morale. The prisoner of war swap's really important. That's the only tangible agreement so far that has come out of these Istanbul talks that continue, that are sort of ongoing but faltering, Ukraine complaining that Russia is making outrageous demands. As ever, if you've got any questions, please do ask them in the comments below and I'll endeavour to answer as many as I can next time. And if I can't answer them on the show, then I will get into the comments and try and answer them there as well. A few questions from last time. A lot of you were asking, why were there these black circles, many of you identified them as tyres, on the wings and fuselages of those Russian aircraft that were hit in Operation Spider's Web by Ukrainian drones? The short answer is it is an attempt to disguise the aircraft from automatic sort of computer-aided recognition. So it's a form of camouflage, particularly from weapons, drones or long-range missiles that might use thermo-optical imaging systems to guide themselves onto targets. When you look at it with a human eye, it's incredibly clear what you're looking at. You're looking at an aircraft with tyres on top of it. But for other types of recognition systems, computer AI-powered recognition systems that are looking for heat signatures or perhaps like radar reflections, certain shapes that are pre-programmed into them, then clearly these thick rubber tyres will disrupt that. It was not enough to save those planes, as we saw footage from the drones showing them burning. On that, another question that cropped up a couple of times is, what proof did we have? I mean, suggesting, I think, what proof did we have that of Operation Spiderweb? What proof did we have that these planes were destroyed? I think we tried to just address that last time. The videos that the Ukrainians released did not correlate in full to the numbers of aircraft they claimed they had destroyed. But they did show, there was a lot of footage that they'd released clearly showing these drones flying into these aircraft, clearly showing aircraft already on fire. There was separate corroborating imagery taken just by Russian civilians passing by, showing the sort of plumes of smoke from these airfields. And then finally, of course, there was the satellite imagery that emerged in the days following Operation Spiderweb from various sources, so from American satellite companies, some even from a Chinese satellite company, clearly showing damaged aircraft on the flight pans. Third question related to this, a couple of you asking this as well, was why are we disclosing the Ukrainian operation? And specifically, I think, why were we disclosing how they did it? Of course, we talked about how the drones were concealed in sort of false ceiling spaces, cavities of these garden sheds that were on the back of flatbed lorries driven across Russia. It was the Ukrainians who put that information into the public domain. Ukraine's SBU, which claimed responsibility for the operation, revealed those details. Now, I understand the question, why reveal a tactic? That oftentimes when we are privy to tactics, techniques, procedures, Allied forces ask us, and we do not reveal them because we don't want to give their enemies an edge. But Ukraine revealed this, and I think Ukraine revealed this, it's telling that they did, because they're not just trying to destroy Russia's aircraft, although that's hugely valuable from them from a military point of view. They are also fighting a campaign in the information space. There is always a battle for a sort of propaganda war, a battle for momentum, a battle for the narrative. And a lot of you sort of picked up on this intuitively in the comments, with comments like, oh, you know, Trump says Ukraine has no cards. What does he say to this? Well, exactly that. This shows by revealing what they've done and how they've done it, how audacious and spectacular and successful it was, that sort of amplifies the Ukrainian victory. The final question, though, is, does it make a difference? Well, that will remain to be seen. Russia has resources, men and military materiel. Its economy has been switched over to a full war economy. It is doing everything it can to sustain itself in this conflict. But aircraft, like the ones Ukraine destroyed, are expensive and hard to produce quickly. So it's almost inevitable it will make some difference. The real question, I suppose, is will it make enough of a difference? And of course, that's something we will continue to look at closely in future shows. Thank you very much for watching. If you do have questions, please do ask them in the comments below. And remember, if you'd like to join Frontline, then please click on the links, which I hope should be appearing now. Thank you. We're in a Ukrainian armoured vehicle and we're heading towards the Russian border.